Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparutade sangamatasa tawara ye soravanta bamunjantu satang. So this afternoon, it's the one the Uposatha day, and I've been asked to give a Dhamma reflection. So the words that we use in English, translated from the Pali language or Thai language into English in this tradition. In most religions, in fact, all religions talk about love. And so this word in English is a word that can mean all kinds of things. It can mean just you like something very much, or at the moment you desire somebody very much, or it can mean describe sexual desire or preference for foods or situations, or ultimately in the religious sense, the spiritual sense, it means it's like metta and upekkha together. Or in Christian terms, they talk about unconditional love. The love that we feel with desire, liking something or somebody, is based on delusion. So that, like and dislike are a pair. And so sometimes you like somebody, you say you love them, or you hate them or dislike them. It changes according to conditions. You can't like something all the time. It changes when the conditions change, then we dislike what we liked before. We fall in love with somebody, and then the conditions change and we fall out of love, we hate them, angry with them. And so these are the conditions of mental states that we create around our reactions to situations, conditions in the world that we experience through the senses. But unconditioned love, metta, means that it doesn't mean liking. It doesn't mean that you like something that you don't like, but it is a non-critical acceptance of the way things are, whether the condition might be likable or unlikable, lovable or unlovable. So metta is the first Brahma Vihara, and then we practice metta bhavana. We have all kinds of spreading metta throughout the universe. And metta is translated as love, unconditioned love, which is really ultimate reality. Metta and upekkha, these put in the context of Brahma Viharas, also in paramitas, or accumulated virtues. Upekkha is oftentimes translated as indifference. So I remember years ago when I was a samanera, I asked a monk in Thailand about what upekkha really meant, and he said, translated it into indifference, which is not a very good translation, because indifference is like not caring or just ignoring or brushing aside something you're indifferent to, you're not interested in or care about in any way. But upekkha, or equanimity, is a much preferable English translation. Equanimity or equality, when we begin to see in terms of Dhamma, of the way things are, all conditions are equal because they share the three characteristics. All phenomena, all conditions are, they're equal in the sense that they arise and cease. All conditions are impermanent. All conditions are unsatisfying, unsatisfactory. All conditions are not personal, not a real permanent self, not a soul, not some real internal individual essence of each being. Because these are all divisive sankharas, and so the equality that they share is in the characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta. So whether it's an angel, a devata, or a devil, Mara, or whatever terms you want to use, from the most beautiful, best, to the highest, to the lowest, the meanest, horrible hell realm, all conditioned phenomena is equal in the sense that they arise and cease. They're empty. They're not a real person. They're not a soul. Not the real nature of any individual. They arise and cease in our minds according to conditions. So when we're praised, when we get acknowledged or we're successful, then we feel a certain joy, happiness. That is not equanimous. It's not indifferent, but it arises, that joy of being praised and appreciated, loved and respected is like this. And when the opposite happens, when you're despised, rejected, criticized, diminished in all sorts of ways that societies can think and operate, then that kind of anger, resentment, hatred, those are conditions that arise and cease according to conditions. So in metta, it's translated usually as loving kindness. Conditions are the way they are. You can't just choose conditions and hold on to what you like and discard and reject what you don't like. But what you can do is be aware of this reality. All conditions are impermanent and not self. And that is metta, where you're allowing conditions to be what they are without wanting to get rid of them or hold on to them in any way whatsoever. So metta isn't about desire. It's not like bhavadana. We're not trying, to be people with a lot of metta, trying to become someone that's full of metta, because that's still, coming from the sense of I've got to conquer my aversion and ignorance and become a monk or a nun with metta for all sentient beings. That's an ideal. And you can create an ideal out of that. of being able to be an individual person, an individual monk or an individual nun that is just filled with metta all the time, filled with loving kindness for all sentient beings. But that's an ideal that we create in the mind. So how many reflections have I offered over the past few months just on the limitation of ideals? Not that there's anything wrong with ideals, they are ideal. They're the best. But also the best has its opposite as the in the English word, the worst. So where metta doesn't have an opposite, it's not about, not having metta or having metta. Metta is natural. It's Dhamma. It's reality. And it's what we begin to awaken to when we let go of desire. So you can't, as much as we would like to become an ideal person, an ideal samana, an ideal citizen, an ideal bhikkhu, an ideal siladhara, as much as that operates in an ideal that we grasp, then it's going to be disappointing because you're still operating from the personal, from the self-view, from the atta, the self-view of trying to become something that you imagine at its very best. And we can, at moments, feel metta or unconditional love for all sentient beings in moments of silence and success and acceptance, when everything is pleasant and wonderful for us. That's a peak moment. Because conditions do have their peak moments. They arise, they reach a peak, and then they decrease, they disappear. They disappear into what? Where do conditions arise from, and where do they cease? What do they cease into? Ask yourself this question: where does hatred come from? Where does it? Is it some kind of energy in the universe we imagine? Some kind of evil force, the axis of evil, the devil operating in society to delude us and corrupt us with evil thoughts and evil actions? That's another image we create of some evil force in society that we've got to be constantly on the lookout for, to try to avoid or destroy in some way or another. So all this is, the term conceptual proliferation, this way we proliferate with our thoughts and our ideas and our views. So we can imagine anything, an evil force that's going to overtake the whole planetary system. Science fiction oftentimes has these projections of the future as taken over by unseen forces of evil in the universe, and these are images, imaginations made up by human beings. And we can grasp these images and feel very threatened and become quite paranoid, quite suspicious of everything around us. Just like the COVID pandemic, when we think of, going outside the monastery, or who comes in the monastery might be infected with COVID-19, and you go outside the monastery, you might contract some kind of evil disease and bring it back into the community. So when we dwell on these kind of thoughts, not that these are anything wrong with this, But when we live in a realm of our own conceptions and beliefs, then it can change into fear and paranoia, resentment, and where we feel that we're totally incapable of loving kindness or metta. So how many of you have feel you failed in terms of metta as an ideal? Because on a personal level, it changes according to conditions. So in Pali, you have this word, itabajyata, which means things are dependent on conditions. All conditions arise and cease from the unconditioned. The conditions change, but the unconditioned doesn't change. It's immutable, perfect. Dhamma. You can see it as unconditioned love. We take our refuge not in some idealized view of just liking all conditions equally as a self, as an individual personality, because we can't do that. That's impossible. But we can take refuge in Dhamma. And Dhamma, in this sense, this Pali word, is also meaning ultimate reality, perfection, wholeness, completeness, that accepts everything, because within this experience of a human birth, we have to live with these changing conditions of our physical bodies, our emotional habits, our cultural biases, our political views, our gender biases, our wishes, our fears, hopes and fears and desires change according to other conditions. So when we take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, like this morning, Ajahn Sumedho was giving the Anagarika's the 8 precepts. And I always like to listen to Bhutang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami, because that to me is just a beautiful thing to say and to reflect on. Is it just a ceremonial part of this Thai tradition? Is it just an empty phenomenon that we just repeat over and over according to Uposatha days and people requesting precepts and refuges? And we can just see it in terms of traditional form, which it is. It is a traditional form. But in what I'm suggesting and encouraging is a real investigation of what Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha really is in a practical sense. Is it just words that we repeat, or is it ideas or ideals that we believe in, or we feel we should believe in or grasp? Or like Bhutto, the mantra form of Buddha's name. What is Buddha? Here and now. If this is timeless, if this is Dhamma, here and now, apparent here and now, timeless, what is Buddha in relationship to Dhamma? Why do you take refuge in Buddha first, and then Dhamma, and then Sangha? So in this reflection, Buddha is mindfulness, conscious awareness here and now. This is what you take refuge in. Because it is a refuge. It's perfect here and now. It doesn't change. It's not dependent upon conditions of being liked or disliked, praised or criticized. Because just notice in your own life, when you're praised, you know what you're feeling. You like that. Liking is like this. When you're criticized, admonished, or reject it or despise, you feel like this. That's awareness, that's consciousness aware of feeling according to the conditions that you're experiencing in the moment. But the ignorant, what we call ignorance or avijja, is lacking in wisdom. So mindfulness isn't something you concentrate on or try to perfect in some kind of personal achievement. Trying to become more mindful or completely mindful is an ideal you might hold to or like. But consciousness is here and now all the time. It's not something that depends on being praised or rejected or concentrating on objects or conditions that you're particularly involved in at the time. But the difference with the unenlightened individual is that they're still conscious and aware, but they have ignorance to interpret experience through the self-view, through Sakya Ditti, Silabhata Paramasa Vicikicca. So everything becomes personal and liking or approving or disapproving, disliking, because that's the way the human mind operates. Just the languages that we use, that we think in, that we hold to, are based on this dualistic system. You think of heaven, hell, angels, devils, God, Satan. Even the English word God has to have an opposite in Christian terms. Satan, some kind of devil. God is good, Satan is bad. These are dualistic terms. If you have best, you've got to have worst. Right and wrong, good and bad. But what is prior to thinking or interpreting or reacting to experience is awareness. So the other day I gave a reflection on the difference between reaction and response. Reactions are like pushing the button. Somebody criticizes you and you get very angry or defensive. That's a reaction. One can understand that. We don't like to be criticized. Sometimes we're criticized justly, fairly. Sometimes it's totally wrong, out of malice and aversion. We don't like, we can say, well, I appreciate criticisms, which is a response rather than a reaction. A response is not just reacting to the immediate situation, but reflecting. So we can respond to praise and blame, or just react to it. When we're praised, we're over the moon, happy, makes our day. We love everybody. When we're criticized, rejected, we're bitter, resentful, angry, feeling worthless. But what is it that's aware of feeling worthless or feeling joyful? What is conscious awareness in the present moment that, whether you interpret it in terms of personal qualities or you respond with wisdom, with understanding. So this is what mindfulness then aligned with wisdom is enlightenment. Seeing things as they are. Realizing that all conditions are impermanent and not self. There's no condition that has any kind of permanent personal quality, whether you want to call it soul. Do each of us have individual souls? You can believe that my soul is very different from your soul, which when we talk about soul, it's usually about feeling. So the feelings can be different, because the conditions are like our appearance. Each person, no matter how conforming we are in terms of what we're saying, what we're wearing, how much conformity can you achieve? Because we're still, on the condition level, very different. And that's just natural. The conditions, phenomena are. They're supposed to be that way. Earth, fire, water, and air, they change according to other conditions. They're always dependent upon other conditions. And so when we take refuge in our views and opinions about ourselves, about other people, about the world around us, the society we live in, when we grasp these views, then we're in conflict with those that don't agree with us, because views can be seen from different perspectives. The world, how we see the world, isn't going to be the same for each one of us. So my view of the world, my personal view of the world, and your personal view of the world can be totally opposite. But in terms of unconditional love or metta, views are views, whether they're, my views or your views. Views are sankharas. They arise and cease. The world that we project through our consciousness, that manifests through consciousness, the world that we create, that we believe in, is not going to be the same for everybody, even in the Sangha. So right now, just listening to the news this morning about the conflict in Jerusalem, just the endless conflict between Israelis and Palestinians and Christians over a wall or a holy place in Jerusalem, that because each one sees things from a different perspective, who's right and who's wrong. That's what's going on ever since I can remember. There's endless conflicts between religions. Islam sees things in a certain way. You're conditioned with Islamic cultural, religious conditioning. You see the world through those conditions. So you can't expect them to see the world through Israeli perceptions. And the same for us all. We each see the world, we create our own worlds to live in, whether it's Amaravati or a place in a holy site in Jerusalem. These different views, different positions, cultural conditioning is not going to, you can kind of promote conformity through fear. So very authoritarian systems, create Gestapos and Stasis and, things that create fear. You govern, you make everybody afraid so they conform to what you tell them to conform to. So conformity, it isn't really the way to handle this problem, is it? Just to making you all afraid of me, to force you to believe everything I say and grasp it. But what I'm saying is reflective rather than demanding conformity or belief. So it's encouraging you to wake up and see for yourself the nature, all conditions are impermanent. The Buddha said this. Mystics of various religions have alluded to this, all conditions are impermanent. And you don't have to look very far to begin to realize that. Just how your mood changes when you wake up in the morning to when you're receiving the food for the meal, when you're eating the meal, when you're tired, when you're feeling healthy and vigorous, when you're sick. When people say very frightening things to you or threaten you, you feel, you can't help but feel what you're feeling. But you can be aware. And this kind of training that we call meditation here at Amaravati is this encouragement to trust in this awareness, because it is a refuge. It's not an ideal. It's not something that depends upon time and place and everything going well or the world falling apart. So trusting in awareness and wisdom, can individuals be wise? Is wisdom the prerogative of monks or samanas who practiced meditation for years? Is it something you attain, something you lack? We can see, we can condemn somebody else, criticize someone else about how they're lacking in wisdom. Or we see somebody else as being very wise. What do we mean by that? And what's our relationship to wisdom? How do you feel about yourself as being wise? Do you understand what wisdom is? Knowledge is one thing. You acquire a lot of knowledge. You can study philosophy and psychology and science and gain all kinds of knowledge and wise sayings from the sages of the past, from religious traditions, wisdom of the Buddha, the Dhammapada, the suttas, filled with wisdom teachings. And you personally, each one of you, do you see yourself as wise, or wisdom is something you've got to get, something you lack because you make mistakes or react badly to particular conditions or situations? Then of course that's the sense of, I should be wise, but I'm not. I'm still deluded. I've been practicing meditation for 10 years now, and I'm still deluded. This is, you're not really listening to the teaching when you believe these perceptions of yourself. The perceptions might arise in any of us, but whether you believe them or not, to see that these perceptions are impermanent. The sense of yourself as being a wise person, there's no such thing as a wise person. There's wisdom that's equally available to all of us. Every moment, every eternal present moment, wisdom is here and now. It's Dhamma. It's reality, available all the time. So this encouragement for you to really be this wise observer, this Bhutto. Take your stand, your refuge in Buddha, realizing Dhamma, rather than a person trying to get enlightened or become wise through memorizing suttas or wise sayings of great sages. When you try to think about what I was saying, you get confused because you're still trying to figure it out, rather than this sense of relaxed openness in which the thinking habit can cease. When you think about not thinking, you're still thinking. So you can't really just try to become someone that doesn't think. That's impossible. Trying to make yourself into somebody that doesn't have any thoughts is an ideal, but that's not the way things really operate in this realm. We're thinking creatures, human beings. We have a thinking ability. So it can be a curse because we can create endless problems just through thinking, through creating fears, out of desire, out of hatred, out of resentment. We can hate other people, we can kill and murder and torture, and just through believing in propaganda, fear, and conditions that we just hold on to and become taken over by our thoughts, our beliefs, or the fears that we have in God's reaction of experience. So if there is an evil force in the universe, the Buddha pointed it out as avijja, or ignorance of Dhamma. So ignorance in this sense is not knowing the reality of here and now, timeless. The eternal present moment is all we ever are. No matter what you've done in the past, or what you think you are, or what you want to become as some ideal in the future, perfection is here and now. Dhamma is here and now. It's not something you're going to get after years of meditation and renunciation and hard work. So when we try to perfect ourselves as individuals, we're bound to, we might become better personalities or more disciplined or more accepting of conditions, but if seen always from the personal sense of trying to attain and control and get rid of and resist, we're caught in the trap of samsara. That's what samsara really means. The endless cycles of habit that we bind ourselves to through this ignorant idea that I am a separate individual in a universe out there. The universe is out there. It's the sun. What would happen if the sun suddenly went out, disappeared? We'd all be dead, wouldn't we? We're totally dependent upon the sun. The moon, the stars, where, these forms are very dependent upon other conditions. So, when we look to the universe out there, with a lot of interest now in science, modern science, in going to Mars and exploring the universe that we perceive through our senses. So we're worried about the Earth becoming uninhabitable, so we're looking to Mars. But the pictures, the photographs they take of Mars doesn't look very inhabitable either. It looks much worse than anything on the Earth. And the moon doesn't look particularly nice place to live. Might be an interesting experience, to tell all your friends you've been to the moon. you put the Dhammacakka flag on the moon, when you could get a lot of praise and win a prize, maybe. But would you want to go and live on the moon permanently? Or the other possible planets in the universe that we can't see, but we imagine? You could imagine galaxies beyond galaxies beyond galaxies. It goes on ad infinitum to our ability to imagine. But what is the reality of here and now? The deathless reality is consciousness here and now. So it's not something that you're going to find at the end of the universal system with all its multitude of galaxies, but awaken here and now, at this very present reality. By being the puto, the witness to the conditions that you're experiencing individually. So I'm not saying you should think like I do and believe everything I do, because you can't do that. I could kind of, if I were a tyrant and I hadn't practiced Buddhism for a long time, I might kind of threaten you with, you go to hell, you'll get reborn in some preta realm or hellish state if you break the precepts, or if you misbehave, or if you tell a lie, or if you disrobe, or whatever. I could threaten you with fears about what will happen to you if you don't perfect your life as a samana, and that would be fear conditioning. You're behaving because of fear, because you're afraid to misbehave, because you get punished. And that's how we're conditioned as individuals. Just look at your parents and your schoolmasters, the different societies that we come from, about reward and punishment. It doesn't take you very long when you realize, it's easier to obey mother than to disobey her. You get rewarded or punished. So, this is, children learn very quickly how to behave, how to get the praise, how to be accepted because of reward and punishment. Those are the conditions that we experience through the conditioned realm, the societies that we identify with. But can religion be just a form of fear conditioning? If you don't believe in God, you go to hell, and that's a threat, isn't it? And this you can know if you've been brought up to believe in God, then the idea of people that are like atheists used to be persecuted, heretics, people that didn't agree with the establishment, with the status quo, were persecuted because they were disrupting the society that we depend on in believing what we're told, in being conditioned by the realities of our family life, our society, our class identity, racial identity. These are all conditioned into us. But consciousness is not conditioned into us. It's not something that is culturally definable or describable. But you know you're conscious. Right now, you know your consciousness is like this. But then you try to think about it, you become confused. What is it exactly like this? What is like this? I don't quite understand. I'm conscious, yes, but what is it? Because there's a desire to create definitions, to see it as an object, to define it, to be able to objectivize it, hold it up. So consciousness is, what we believe in, or is it our thought process? Is it dependent upon our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, brain? Is it something that is consciousness dependent upon the brain? And people that are brain dead, are they no longer conscious? If you lose your memory, do you lose consciousness? As you get old, your memory's not so good. So you have what they euphemistically call senior moments, where you can't remember what you're supposed to. So this is still conscious, even in forgetting, even in not remembering. Consciousness isn't dependent upon the senses. The senses are dependent upon consciousness. They arise and cease in consciousness. So consciousness, when you let go of the word consciousness, it resolves itself in the word Dhamma, the reality here and now. So whether you want to use the word consciousness or let go of it, you have to let go of the word Dhamma, because awaken here and now is not a word. Dhamma is merely a symbol for the reality of now. So be patient with yourself, and no matter how much, like doubt is always a result of thinking. People keep asking me the same questions over and over because they try to figure out what I'm saying, and it ends up as doubt. What is Ajahn Sumedho talking about? Being trusting in awareness, and what does he mean by that? How do I do that? And this is thinking again, isn't it? You think you have to, you're trying to think about what I'm saying rather than trusting in awareness. And we use this phrase, it's like this, Benya Ni Ang and Tai. It's not those words either, but it's just a skillful way of thinking. If you're going to think, right now the feeling that you're experiencing is like this. I'm not trying to describe the feeling of any individual or what I'm feeling, as a quality, but certainly aware. Like consciousness, you can't perceive it because it's not an object. It's what you are here and now. So you're never absent in consciousness. Consciousness is not personal, doesn't arise and cease dependent upon senses. Or Dhamma is not personal. Or the personal is always about the five khandhas. When we use in the five khandhas the vijnana tat, vijnana khandha, the consciousness through the senses, that's dependent. Senses are dependent upon consciousness. So awareness through seeing, through going out looking at objects, is dependent. If you lose consciousness, you can't see. Consciousness itself can't see. It's not a person. It's not an independent being in the universe. It's the reality of here and now. So when I say the door to the deathless is open, aparuta de sangha matasa tawara, that's a Pali quote. Now that's very, so trust that. It's awareness here and now. Whatever you're thinking, feeling, doubting, worrying about, trying to figure out, if you're totally caught in doubt and trying to understand what I'm saying, you're aware of that. That's why you ask questions. But when you ask questions, the result of asking any question is doubt. What do you mean by trusting in awareness? And if you're aware, there's no answer to that question. But there's doubt. And it's not knowing. It is empty, it's silent. You begin to awaken to the silence where all the conditions arise and cease. So it's not something that arises and ceases through the senses. So when we talk about in the five khandhas, vijnana khandha, it's about sensory awareness through senses. So that's always of objects. Aware of those flowers, aware of the siladars, aware of the monks. So you're looking, you're sending, consciousness through the eyes, or sounds, smells, taste, touch, conditions that change are in this constant, relentless, inexorable changing condition. But what doesn't change is awareness, mindfulness, consciousness, or Dhamma. So trust in awareness, in wisdom. So the wisdom teachings of the Buddha are teachings, they're pointers, they're directing, rather than pointing outward towards objects. Like Vipassana insight meditation is about, it's looking inward, Opanayaka Dhamma. You're not seeking Dhamma or enlightenment through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling. Where you go out through the senses, you're dependent upon the senses, but on awareness here and now, it's like this. So it's extremely simple. Where thoughts, thinking process is very complicated. Because it goes on endlessly into the best and the worst, the highest, the lowest, what you can imagine, what you can create through imagination. And so when we try to figure out Dhamma with the intellect, the Bhariyati Dhamma is not about giving us the answers by memorizing Pali scriptures, but it's by reflecting on those teachings, pointing to where they're pointing. And it's always here and now. Right now, you're always here, wherever place your body happens to be in. The time is always now. So there's no place to go, no time to wait for the right time to get enlightened, but to be the awareness itself. And that is a relaxed openness. The reality of here and now is open. It's not focused on an object. It's not about refined experience through concentration on increasing refined objects, but resting in awareness, abiding in awareness here and now. So I offer this as a reflection.